Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, we begin the next of the halachas in Sefer Noshim, the book of women, which we discussed, Hilchos Ishus, the laws of marriage, Hilchos Gerushin. We're in those halachas, we discussed the laws of divorce and also that of another way the woman goes free to remarry, which is when he dies. And that continues the next Hilchos Yibbum VChalitzah, which is the laws when a man dies without any children, that then his wife has to do Yibbum, which is to either marry her brother-in-law, her husband's brother, or VChalitzah, which is if they don't want to get married, then he does this type of divorce for the widow. Which there are 8 parakim in these halachas. This parak is going to be discussing regarding the obligation of Yibbum VChalitzah, the halacha as relates to tsaris, to the co-wives, and the kareves, the relatives, also regarding the obligation of waiting after the death. Parak Beis continues on this theme regarding the obligations of Yibbum, specifically how to do Yibbum, the consent of both sides, and the prohibition of the Yavama to marry someone else. In the meantime, what's called the Isser Lazar. And in the third parak, finally, regarding the belief of the trustworthiness of those who are testifying regarding the fact of the husband's death. Then in parak Daled, the Rambam continues on to mitzvahs chalitza, which is the other option of that of divorcing the Yavama, and the different text of the documents relating to chalitza. Then the final 4 parakim in parak Hey, Rambam is going to discuss the different computations of when there's maimer, which is this type of kiddushin that's done for Yibbum, with get and cohabitation and chalitza, all the different cases that could come out from that. Parak Vav, which is the primary theme of the last 4 parakim regarding the brothers and the Yavamas, those that are fit to do Yibbum and chalitza. Parak Zayin discusses when there's many brothers and there's many Yavamas. And Parak Ches discusses different situations of doubt as they relate to these halachas. So Rambam begins, he says, Yesh b'chlol and shalosh mitzvahs. In these halachas of Yibbum chalitza, there's categorical 3 commandments. Shtei mitzvahs, say 2 positive commandments, a mitzvah achas, let's say 1 negative prohibition, and these are the specifics. First of all, aleph liyabim, the mitzvah to do Yibbum, as we explained regarding when the husband died without any children, to marry the brother-in-law. Lachleitz, the Rambam then mentions chalitza afterwards, as he quotes later on the Halacha Beis, that ideally first you do Yibbum, if not, then he does chalitza to his sister-in-law. And mitzvah gimel is the loisa say is shleitinasi yavama le'izha, that the yavama, which is the woman her husband passed away and she has not done Yibbum chalitza with the yavama, with her yavam, so she should not marry a foreign person, anyone else, until the rights of the yavam are not removed from her, which is in either one of those 2 ways of Yibbum chalitza. And as Rambam explains, because the woman that's fit for have Yibbum to done to her is called Zekuka Yibbum. She's considered attached to the mitzvah of Yibbum. Or Shusayavim Nikras, and the rights of the Yavam on her, that right is called Zika, which the terminology of Zika means the terminology of a connection. As it says, Pasuk in Eve, Vesasurim Bezikim, those who are chained in the knots. Because every Yavama is attached and bound to her Yavam until he either does Yibbum or chalitza. Uber mitzvahs elu b'parak, an explanation of these 3 mitzvahs are in these chapters. So the Rambam begins Parak Rishon, as we explained. Here we open up with the obligation, that of the different co-wives and the relatives, and the obligation of waiting after the death of her husband. Halacha Aleph, mitzvah saseh min ha-Torah, a positive commandment from the Torah is sheyabim adam eshes achav me'aviv, that a person should do Yibbum on his brother that he has from the same father, what's called his paternal brother. And they share the same father. And Beimin and Asurin, whether she was widowed from marriage, Beimin and Asurin, whether only from halachic engagement. It makes there, if he dies without any children, like it says in the Pasuk in the Rambam Chafei, Uvein ein loy, that he doesn't have a son. So Yavama, Yava Yaleha, so her Yavam, which is her brother-in-law, her husband's brother, should cohabit with her. Now, according to biblical law, we'll see rabbinically otherwise, but according to biblical law, he does not have to do kiddushin on his yavama, which would be with his monies or documents. Because this is already his wife, that they acquired to him from heaven. I mean, the moment her husband dies, she's automatically bound to his brother. So you don't have to do a special kiddushin. Rather, he cohabits with her, and automatically that they're now considered married. It doesn't have to write for her ksuba, because her ksuba is on the estate of her departed husband. Because since this was thrown upon this brother-in-law this type of a marriage. They don't obligate him to have to write his own ksuba from his own assets that then it's all tied up to his new wife, the Yavama. Rather, it's his brother who departed his estate. Now the Yavam who acquires that, who inherits that, is not allowed to sell from that estate, whether before the Yibbum or after the Yibbum, because all of that is indebted to his new wife, which was his brother's old wife. But again, if his brother didn't write a ksuba, then he would have obligation to write that of 100 zuz, like any woman that's a ba'ula, and then his estate would be obligated to her. On that, the Rambam contains halacha base. Now, let's say leiratz liyabim. Let's say he doesn't want to do Yibbum, like the pasuk says in Dvarim Chafevim, lo yachbas ish lekachas zivim. He doesn't want to do Yibbum, or she doesn't want to do Yibbum with him. So then the mitzvah is the other mitzvah, as we said, the mitzvah to do chalitza tar. Then she's permitted to go ahead and marry someone else, which that was the third mitzvah, as we said, which is Yibbum chalitza, and not to marry someone else until, which is a leisa say, until she has Yibbum or chalitza from the Yavam. And this is upon the commandment, as we mentioned in the introduction, to do chalitza if it doesn't want to do Yibbum. Somebody says in the pasuk, she should remove his shoe, etc. As we'll explain the whole procedure of chalitza and Perek Daled. And the Rambam Shita is, he rules like that mandam in the Gemara, that the mitzvah of Yibbum, to marry this sister-in-law, comes before the mitzvah chalitza. Doesn't want to do it, then they do chalitza. Now, halacha gimel. Now the Rambam clarifies what qualifies for the obligation of Yibbum chalitza. What's the situation of considered that this is appropriate for Yibbum chalitza? So he says, this is in turn over there, when ein loy, that his brother doesn't have a son. So it's actually not just a son. It's whether a son or a daughter. Not only that, even if the son or daughter passed away, but the son or the daughter themselves had children. So since there are descendants from his brother, and whether it's from this woman or from another woman, that would exempt his wife from having to do with his brother chalitza or yibbum. And moreover, even if a child was illegitimate from an inappropriate relationship, or that child is an idol worshiper, doesn't make a difference. There is a paitas ishtam, like it says in the Gemara, that mikal makim, whatever the child's going to be, it's going to exempt his wife from doing chalitza yibbum, because ultimately there is a descendant from his brother. Now halacha dalad al b'nei min hashivcha min hagaya. But what doesn't qualify for a child is if his brother has a son, the one who passed away, from a maidservant or from a non-Jewish woman. Then in the paitas ishtam, that does not exempt his wife, because the child that a person has from a maidservant are avodim, are considered slaves, and they don't have lineage. It's not considered a descendant of the one who passed away. So the vabam and agaya, if someone has a child from a non-Jewish woman, guy, that child is considered a non-Jew. It's as if they're not even around, as if there's no such a child for the descendants of this person, as the Rambam explains. I remember Shidchat says regarding a maidservant, that the maidservant, the Ebed Yisrael, who could take a maidservant as a wife, the woman and her children, Tila Dinah, goes to the master. It's not considered his own children. Malaman comes to teach that the children are like her. Regarding non-Jewish women, it says the pasuk in the Dvarim Zayin, Ki Yasser es bintcha me'achar, because they're going to remove your son from after me, which the pasuk previously had been talking about. Don't take the daughter of the non-Jewish man for your son, because what the pasuk is telling you over here, that if you're going to take his daughter for your son, then his father-in-law is going to remove your son from after, because the child's not going to be considered his child. Rather, it's going to be the child of the non-Jewish woman as a non-Jewish child. So it's being removed as if it's considered part of the Jewish people. More says Ram, even more. And even this child who is saying, okay, it's not considered his child, but that child was freed from the son of the maidservant. Or that child from the non-Jewish woman converts to Judaism. So they consider like other converts and freed slaves, which they're considered like a new person, but not considered a descendant of this man. Never does not exempt his wife from Yibbum chalitza. Says Ram Hariso comes out, where he adds on a little even more chiddush. So if he had a son from his maidservant, and he frees him and her, and he marries the maidservant, but he dies without any children. So this woman, who when he married ultimately was Jewish, but the child he had from her was before they became Jewish, so that child's not considered his own child. she would have to do Yibbum to his brother. And even though the son that he had from her was already freed and is already Jewish, it doesn't make a difference. It's not considered his child, and therefore the maidservant who ultimately became his wife would have to have Yibbum VChalitzah from his brother. Halacha hey, Misha Meis, someone died, and he leaves his wife over that's pregnant. So here's where it gets a little more complicated. The Rambam starts describing what the halacha is going to be. If she miscarried after he died, so she's going to have Yibbum because ultimately her husband died without any viable child. Now, but if let's say she gave birth, and the child came out alive to the ear space of this world, even though he died the moment he was born, but he was born, it wasn't a stillborn, so the mother is exempt from Chalitza and Yibbum. But based on rabbinic law, it's actually it was only until we know most definitely that the 9 months, the months of the pregnancy have been completed, which is that the child was born after a full 9 months. Because if we don't know after how long it was that the child was born, so if the child survived for 30 days, we know that's a viable child. And therefore it exempts the father's wives from Chalitza Yibbum because he died with a child. Even though he died after 30 days, but that was already considered a child. If the child died within 30 days. And on day 30 itself, whether he died from an illness, where the child fell from a roof, or if a lion ate it, where you would say maybe without these external circumstances the child would have survived, doesn't make a difference. It's still harisa suffix, nafel, suffix ben kibbutz. We don't know if the child was a viable or non-viable child. We don't know if it would have lived 30 days, which is the mile marker to tell us that it's a viable child. So according to rabbinic law, again, according to biblical law, if the child died even the moment after it was born, it would exempt. But according to rabbinic law, since we don't know if it was definitively a viable child, so we require rabbinically as chalitza because you can't do Yibbum because maybe it is a viable child, as it is according to basic biblical law, and that would be a prohibition of him having relations with his forbidden sister-in-law. So therefore, one, however, requires rabbinically that of chalitza. Now, halacha vav, the Rambam continues to qualify what classifies as the obligation of Yibbum. Someone has a brother, even if that brother is an illegitimate child, which means that he was born from a forbidden union, or he's an idol worshiper, being caught in Megillah, whether he's a minor or an adult, but when from the majority of his head, and from when his head, the majority of his body comes out to the space of this world, in other words, if he was born, and birth is considered the head and the majority of the body before his brother passed away, so he was there at the moment his brother, he didn't have a sibling until literally a moment before, even if it was a moment before that his brother was born, that requires that his wife, the one who passed away, has to have Yibbum. In other words, what that means to say is for the law of Yibbum, meaning that she cannot marry someone else, but most definitely she cannot do Yibbum to him because one of the cases we described was that brother is a mamzer. Obviously she's forbidden to mamzer. It just means that she would be required to have chalitza of him. But in contrast, let's say if the brother was born after his brother passed away, it would not require the sister who didn't yet marry anyone else to have Yibbum chalitza, because it says in the pasuk Yishiv Achim Yachtav has to be the brothers lived at the same time, as Rambam explains later on in Perek Vav. Now, similar to what we said regarding having a child, there's two elements regarding Yibbum chalitza. There's that person who passed away, he has to have not had a child, and he also has to have a brother that could do Yibbum chalitza. So we spoke about regarding the status of if he has a child or not, regarding a maidservant and a non-Jewish woman. Now we're talking about regarding his brother. If his brother was, because his father had relations with a non-Jewish maidservant or from a non-Jewish woman, so that's not considered his brother for any halacha. Existed, therefore that does not require his wife, who now her husband passed away without any children, to have to do Yibbum chalitza with him. And moreover, even if this brother, his birth was in Jewish sanctity because his mother converted when she was pregnant with him, with that brother, since the conception was when she was not Jewish yet, so that's not considered his brother, and therefore it's like there's no brothers over there, she can marry whoever she wants to. Halacha Zayin, moreover, further qualifies the Rambam, if he's a regular brother, but a maternal brother, they share the same mother, not the same father, Again, in Chashuv Machem, that's not considered a brother. Elala Velas, only with the laws of mourning, rabbinically, Ula Aegis, and with the laws of testimony, rabbinically, that they're considered brothers, relatives. Avlin Yerusha regarding the laws of inheritance. Elin Yibbum VChalitzah, what we're discussing over here to do Yibbum VChalitzah. Hareim Kim Yishain, they're not even there, that like they don't exist as a brother. Shein Ach Ve'elamav, because the law is, it's only considered a brother if they share the same father, what's called a paternal brother. Moreover, continues Rambam on these halachas halachachas. Gemshin is gairu. If there were converts that converted, non-Jewish brothers that converted together, or if there were slaves that were freed, they're not considered as brothers. For him, they're considered as foreigners one to another. And the Rambam says a bigger chiddush. Says, even if one of them is almost a full Jew, meaning he was conceived before the mother, when the mother was pregnant, she converted when she was pregnant with him, and when he was born, she was already a Jewess. And the other brother was already, when she was already Jewish, she conceived and gave birth to him in the state of sanctity. Still, Harim Kazarm, they're considered like foreigners to each other. And moreover, even if these are twins, which obviously we know that they share the same father because it's one seed that splits into two and it creates these identical twins, and the parents gave birth to them when they were Jewish already, still in B'nei Achva, there's no brotherhood. Ashtei Harosim, it doesn't. It has to be that the conception and the birth were when the parents were Jewish, that they were in sanctity, and therefore then they're going to be full-fledged brothers. Now, Halacha Tes, the Rambam continues regarding other qualifications of the ramifications of Yibbum and Chalitza. It says the Rambam, Mishayli Noshim Rabbis Umesim. Someone had many women, many wives, and he died without any children. So doing biur or chalitza to any one of the wives, that exempts the other ones, and then they're permitted to go and marry other people because she's like the agent for them all. Now, and the brother-in-law cannot do yibbum to two of the wives, like it says in the pasuk in the Devarim. It says is based achiv, that if he's not going to build the house in the singular of his brother, which tells us that the option is only to build one of the houses, meaning one of the wives, and he cannot build two houses. And the same thing is regarding chalitza. Also says base chalutza nol, could only do chalitza to one and not to two of them. And also if he had many brothers, only one of the brothers does chalitza or yibbum, because he's the agent of the brothers. And he does l'achas to one of the wives, and then all the other co-wives are permitted. So essentially, even though there's many wives and many brothers, it's one brother doing it to one of the wives. Halacha Yud. Let's say hayivivamis elu. Let's say from these wives that this one who died had, they were kshevus l'kuna psulis. They were the wives that are valid to marry kahanim subsequently, and there are those who are invalid. Meaning, let's say one of the wives he had married was a grusha, or was a divorcee, which is forbidden to a kain. The widows are permitted to a kain, but the divorcee are forbidden. So if this brother-in-law is doing yibbum, so miyabim leads the shit, he can do yibbum whichever one of the wives that he wants to. But the moychad doing chalitza, yachlis lebesula. Let him at least do chalitza to the one that was already invalid, the divorcee, who anyways couldn't marry a kain. That he shouldn't invalidate the one that was fit to marry a kain by doing chalitza, because doing chalitza, which is very similar to divorce, actually rabbinically makes the woman forbidden to marry a kain. And as the Gemara Yivamis tells us that don't spill out the water from the pit that others need to use. Meaning, if a kohen can marry her, why ruin the option? You're anyways doing chalitza. Doesn't make a difference which one you're doing to. Do it to the one that's a grusha, and not ruin the other ones from being able to, any one of the other ones from being able to do, to marry subsequently a kohen. Halacha Yidalf. Continuing on the, when there's more than one wife or more than one brother, Mislo Achan Rab. Let's say a person had many brothers who passed away without children. But now their wives of his brothers fall in front of him. So if he could do yibbum to all his brothers' wives, so if he could provide for them, so let him do yibbum. If not, okay, then chalitz he could do chalitz to all of them. Or chalitz mishiyitzim, he could do chalitz whichever one he wants to. Miyam mishiyitz, he could do yibbum to whichever one he wants to. Again, but it could only be one from each household. Meaning from any brother, let's say his brother had many wives, and there was many brothers that passed away without any children. So again, he could do chalitz to all, yibbum to all, but again, from each household, he cannot do more than one yibbum to to any one of those wives. Halacha Yud Beis. So now the Rambam moves on. Now, once a person is doing yibbum, hakainis is yivimtai. If someone marries his yivama, so nesut tzreseha alav v'ashar achen. So the co-wives, let's say his brother died with 4 wives, and he's doing Yibbum to one of them. So the co-wives become forbidden on that brother who is doing Yibbum to one of the wives, and they become forbidden on him, Bashar and all the other brothers. And so let's say him or one of the other brothers cohabits subsequently with one of the co-wives. Is violating a positive commandment. Shlomo says in the pasuk, Yavama Yava Yaleha. Her Yavam should cohabit on her, on this wife whose husband died without any children. What's on this singular? To tell you, but he cannot cohabit with her and with her co-wives. And say a negative prohibition which is derived from a positive commandment is a positive commandment. Mir, it says it in the positive, Yavam Yava Leha, on her. The inference is, but not her and her co-wife. That's a negative prohibition that's inferred from a positive commandment, has the status as a positive commandment. So too, let's say some of this chalitza to Zivama. Nesra ha-chalutza, so that woman that he did chalitza on becomes forbidden, he, her, the chalutza and all her co-wives, ala chalitz, on the one who did chalitza, val sha'achen, and on all the brothers. V'kulan asuras alim, they recite from kishnias. And all of them are forbidden on them from rabbinic law, like the secondary arayas, because the Shittas of Rambam is, this that says in the pasuk that the Gemara darshans in Yevamis, Ashlei Yivnes Beisachem, that he will not build his brother's household. It doesn't say Ashlei Bana, that he did not build. It says that he will not build. To tell you that since he didn't build, meaning he didn't do Yivim, he did Chalitza, then he cannot, Lo Yivni, he cannot build it anymore. Because once he did Chalitza, and he did it for all his brothers, and so too the Chalutza was the agent of all the tzaras, so it comes out that all forbidden on the brothers, an equal isser of forbidding to now rebuild it anymore. In contrast to the Ramban, and the Zasag and Seven Mitzvahs, actually counts it as a mitzvah deraisa of Olaisase. But as the Rambam explains, he says, why is it only rabbinically forbidden? Because once his brother died without any children, nistalik iser ever ma'al kol nashim. So the biblical erva of being his brother's wife was removed on all his wives. That's what the mitzvah of Yibbum is allowing, because Esa Eshesach is forbidden. So once he died without any children, that removes the Eser. So just like a rabbinically prohibited woman, if one would do kedushin, the kedushin would take effect. So to here, they would take effect on the chalutzais and the tzaris from him or from any one of the brothers. But rabbinically, it's forbidden because once you did chalitza, you're not allowed to rebuild it anymore. Again, which according to the Rambam, that's only a smach ba'amo. That's a rabbinic prohibition. Halacha Yud Gimel. If someone does chalitza to Yavama, kashem she asura love, just like she's forbidden on him. So this is where it's unique now, where we continue regarding once he did chalitza, which besides what we learned from the pasuk, as we said that it's ashalo yivne, he's not a builder anymore. But chalitza is also very similar to gerushin. So uniquely to the brother that's actually doing the chalitza to the yavama, kashem she'asur alav, just like she's forbidden to him, as we mentioned that in the previous halacha. Kach kreveseh asur alav. Also, her relatives are also forbidden on him, because she's like his divorcee, as the Rambam shortly explains. So therefore, for example, Ima, Obita, her mother, her daughter, are forbidden to him. She's forbidden to his son and to his brother. Even her rabbinic relationships are forbidden to him. Going bas bita, for example, her daughter's daughter's daughter, which even his real wife, which is his biblical wife, are only those relationships only rabbinically forbidden to him, are also forbidden to this one who did chalitza. She's also forbidden to his son's son's son. As the Rambam says, closer to the rule is here over here. We consider the chalutza as his wife that he divorced. And moreover, not only do we consider this as his gerusha, let's say his yavama died, and she was still bound to him, meaning he hadn't done Yibbum VChalitzah and she passed away as the Shemeres Yavam, which she was waiting for Yibbum. So Asa B'Kreveseh, he's forbidden in her relatives, as if she was his wife, and that she died when she was with him, because the Zika for Yibbum makes it as if he's married to her. No, but says the Rambam, like we said, all these prohibitions are only rabbinic, because even the original source, which is for all the brothers, are at most the Lashalo Yivne is according to Rambam rabbinic, and moreover, this whole thing of treating her like a grusha, it's not really a grusha, it's just that it's similar to grusha. And also says the Rambam, Mutra Adam Lisa Achis Tzaras Chalutzas, a person is permitted to marry the sister of the co-wife of the chalutza. So let's say there's many wives, he does chalitza to one of them, the co-wife's sister, he's permitted to marry, Ushar Karbeseha, and not just the sister, but all the other relatives, because when he does chalitza to the Yavama, the co-wife doesn't come with her to court. So when he marries the sister of the co-wife, they're not going to say, oh, he's marrying the sister of the chalutza, because no one ever saw the tzara there to know that this is the sister of the one that he did chalitza to. In contrast, as we'll see in Perek Vav, there's a similar sounding type of a case that actually would be problematic. Halacha Yadal. Asla layavam lisa kreva zukukase. It's forbidden for the yavam to marry the relative of his zukuka. So zukuka is the woman that's bound to, meaning the shemeres yavam, the woman that's waiting. Her husband died and she's waiting for yibum chalitza. So the yavam, who has an obligation to do yibum chalitza, he's not allowed to go and just bypass her and marry the relative of this shemeres yavam. For example, imay bita. He's not only marry the mother or daughter of his yavama. Until one of his brothers does yibum to her, or yachas does chalitza to her, then then that's going to remove the connection that they have, because once the brother does yibum chalitza, now obviously there's no connection to any of the other brothers. Then the relatives are permitted to the other brothers. We said the one that actually does the chalitza, he's forbidden in the relatives. We're talking about the other brothers, would subsequently then be permitted, and then be then he can marry the mother or the daughter or one of the other relatives. Although the older relatives are forbidden on the brother that actually did the chalitza of the yibum, like we explained in the previous halacha, but for the other brothers that didn't do the actual chalitza, they subsequently then could marry those other relatives. Halacha tezvav. Hakainis es yevimte. Now the Rambam moves on further to qualify when someone actually does yibum. If someone brings into his house the yivama, he marries the yivama. Then the gersh subsequently divorces her. If he wants to take her back, he could take her back. And the chiddush in that is, we don't say, oh, wait a second, the mitzvah of yibum that was imposed upon him, he did already, and now he divorced her. Oh, so now she goes back to her prior prohibition of being an issa of Eishasach, of his brother's wife. We say no. Once he did yibum, like it says in the pasuk, once he took her, she's like his wife for all practical purposes. It's not, doesn't have any title at all as the prohibition of being his wife's brother at all. Limited retire, but limited b'sefer, not biblically, not rabbinically. It's like his wife, and just like a person divorces his wife, if she didn't marry anyone else enter him, in the meantime, he can take her back. So too over here. Now, in Halacha Design, the Rambam continues regarding qualifying what it considers as a valid yibum, which is essentially a bia of the yavam of the yavama. Says Rambam Hilchos Yibbum. We already explained in the laws of marriage in Perek Yud Halacha Gimel that a 9-year-old biyaseh bia, his creditation in halacha is considered as an act of bia. Now, but that was halacha in Perek Kabbalah. This is halacha that we have from tradition, from Moshe Rabbeinu, from Har Sinai. Now the figure therefore, which since the whole halacha of yibum depends on the bia, so yavam kat shabal yivimtei. So if there's a minor yavam, he's under 13, that has relations with his sister-in-law, the yavama, is at least 9 years old. So Yikayim, he has to maintain her because he acquired her already with his bia, which is valid, and he cannot divorce her with a get because he's a minor, and the get and a minor's get has no validity, and neither can he do chalitza, as the Rambam is going to shortly explain. Because Aval Enochel says he cannot do chalitza until he becomes an adult, and you check him to see that he's an adult with his 2 pubic hairs. Shari ish kasav parashal in chalitza. Specifically on chalitza, the Torah says that he has to be a man. So regarding the yibum, it's valid, but he can't do gerushin, and neither could he do chalitza until he's an adult. Now, but if he's less than 9 years old, then then his karbatation is not even considered an act of bia, and therefore nothing was done. Now, bia's ben tesha shanim, however, in a but says the Rambam, even the cohabitation of a 9-year-old is not a full-fledged acquisition to be his bona fide wife, to totally remove the zika of yibum from her, that she should only have to require a get afterwards, because ultimately, although his bia is considered bia, it's considered like what an adult's mimer is, which is a rabbinic kedushin for the yavama, which is not a full-fledged kinyan, as Rambam explains later on in the next parak. So the figure therefore, in yavimta in the teres lazar, the yavam is not permitted to a foreign, another person, until the yavam, which was over 9 years old but under bar mitzvah, until he becomes an adult, and then he divorces her with a get, or until he does chalitza to her when he's an adult without having being with her. And then he's also going to have to require actually a get for his bia when he was a minor, like someone that does a mimer, which is a rabbinic kedushin for yavama, where if he doesn't want to do an act of cohabitation, which they require a get for his maimer and the chalitza for the zika, as Rambam explains later on in Perek Hey. Like we explained later on in Perek Hey in Halacha Chaf Aleph. Halacha Yud Zayin. V'chein hayivama haktana. Now we go the corollary to the girl. Also, if the yavama is a minor. So Emratza Yavam Liyam Moisa, if the Yavam wants to do Yibbum with her, so Mayabim, you could do Yibbum with her. And the Chiddush in that is, we're not concerned that maybe she's an islandess, which is not fit to have a child. Comes out that actually she's a Isser Eshes Ach Shalei B'Mokah Mitzvah because she can't have a child, so therefore that's not valid for Yibbum. On that, the Ram is telling us that no, we're not concerned with that, we go after the majority. Most women are not an islandess. Now, but he cannot do chalitza on her until she becomes an adult, and we check her to make sure she's an adult, because we compare her to him, that just like he has to be an adult for chalitza, so she has to be. And even if the first husband had bia with her after she was 12 years old, still we're concerned that maybe she did not bring 2 pubic hairs when there was bia, and maybe she's still a minor. So therefore, we're going to chalitza. We don't rely on the chazaka that once a girl is already 12 that she's considered an adult. Until we check her and we find that she has the signs, only then can we do chalitza. Like we said, just like the yavam cannot do chalitza until he becomes a man, the woman cannot do the chalitza until she becomes an adult woman. Now let's say they're both minors, meaning his is a bia because he's over 9, and she's a yavama that's a minor. So then we bring them up together because he can't divorce her, because again, like we said, the cotton's get is not valid. He can't do chalitza because she's not an adult. So it comes that he has to remain married with her, and then when they become adults, then if he wants to, he can divorce her with a get, or like we said, chalitza with a get. Halacha Yites. So now the Rambam further qualifies regarding the requirements when one could go ahead and do Yibbum and Chalitza. So Yavama should not do Yibbum or Chalitza until they first wait after her husband passed away, a period of 90 days. Except for the day when her husband died, and from the end of the 90 days, from when the Yavam is going to do Yibbum or Chalitza. Like all of the women that we explained previously in Pegid Alpha Mechaz Gerushin, that a woman has to wait a period of 90 days, because we have to be able to check out what's the paternity if she's pregnant from the previous husband. Now, but the Rambam explains, why can she not have chalitza done within 90 days? Chalitza is no concern. Obviously, it's a concern if she was pregnant, because then there's no heter of Yibbum, and there's Eshesach can't marry the brother's wife if he had a child from her. But chalitza is like a divorce, sending her on the way. Why can't you do that within 9 days? So the Rambam Yibbum, because during those 90 days, she's not fit to have Yibbum, because again, she might be pregnant and it might be a bona fide child, and it comes out, it's prohibited for him to have relations with her. Now, but Nemet says in the pasuk in the Varm, if the man's not going to want to take his sister-in-law to do Yibbum, and then she's going to take up his shoe, etc. What you see, the pasuk is putting Yibbum together with Chalitza, to tell you, Yibbum. Only when there's an opportunity for him to do Yibbum, which is after 90 days, then there's the mitzvah of chalitza that's applicable. But as long as you can't do Yibbum, then it's not yet applicable to do chalitza. But if let's say he does Yibbum or does chalitza within the 3 months, if it turns out that she was not pregnant, then she's exempt. She doesn't have anything to do with her, because ultimately it turns out that it was appropriate to do Yibbum chalitza because she was not pregnant from her first husband. Halacha Chaf. Some of this chalitza tis yavama, again within the 3 months, and because it didn't seem like she was pregnant. The nimtzes, after that, it turns out she is mubar, she is pregnant. V'yalada, and she gives birth. So it comes that it wasn't appropriate to do chalitza because he left over a child. So there's no halacha of Yibbum chalitza at all. So if the child was a viable child, it's like no chalitza was ever done. What, you just took over a shoe? There's no halacha that was applicable. So there this woman, although we said a chalutza is forbidden to marry a kohen, she's permitted to marry a kohen. And also he's permitted in her relatives, because it's not like his chalutza, because you didn't do anything. There was no halacha because there was a child over here. Now, let's say she miscarried. Or even if the child did not last 30 days after she had given birth to him, and also we don't know if the child was born full term, because if it was born full term, even if he died within 30 days, the mother would still be exempt from chalitza and from Yibbum. But if it wasn't, and the child didn't last 30 days, then he has to go ahead and do chalitza to her, him or one of his brothers. Shechalitza muberes and the chalitza, because the chalitza of a pregnant woman is not a valid chalitza. Ovis muberes and even and doing bia on a pregnant woman is not considered valid, because it says uven ein loy. You have to see if she's pregnant, then she's not someone that can have chalitza and Yibbum. But again, this has this element of rabbinic prohibition with this chalitza that was done. But one thing is that the chalitza of the muberes is not valid, and therefore you have to go ahead and do it again. Now halacha chaval says Rambam lefikach, therefore hakoines or yechelis livim temuberes. So someone marries or does chalitza to his pregnant yavama, leitinasit tzaras achatelezu. So the co-wife should not get married until the woman gives birth. Why? Because the child does not permit them, as if they have no obligations to the Avam, until the child actually comes out to the airspace of the world. Meaning, when you would look at it and you say, wait, either way, what's the problem? Let the co-wife get married, manavshach, because here there's Yibbum VChalitzah, if the child's not viable, and the child is viable, so the child's viable, so there's no obligation. And we should go after the majority of women who the child is viable. And that we say that no, because the child does not permit until actually is born. So until the child is born, there's no halacha of chalitza and Yibbum, so that's not permitting. And if the child is even going to be born, that's only when the child is actually being born that would permit them to get married. So therefore, the co-wife has to wait until the child is born. Halacha of beis. Let's say someone does Yibbum on his sister-in-law. Turns out she's pregnant. So we separate them because maybe it's going to turn out that the child is viable, and then obviously it's forbidden to be with her because it's his brother's wife without any heter of Yibbum VChalitzah, and he waits for her. If she miscarries, turns out there was no child, so there is a halacha of Yibbum VChalitzah. So he could go back and remain married with her because it is appropriate Yibbum. The mild, if she gave birth, even if the child dies on the day that he's born, he has to divorce her with a get for the bia that he had with her, because in that regard, it's like he married her. But rabbinically, he has to do chalitza, because such a child, rabbinically, does not exempt the mother from chalitza Yibbum, as we had previously said in halacha hey. And then, after he gives her a get and chalitza, she'll be permitted to marry other people. Now, but let's say the child actually survived 30 days after he was born. That's a definitive, bona fide, viable child. So she doesn't need to have a get from her brother-in-law. She was forbidden as an erva, and actually they need to have a kapar, an atonement for that. And there was no Yibbum, no chalitza, there's nothing over here. So therefore she doesn't require any chalitza, not biblically, not rabbinically. Now halacha chav gimel. Let's say she gave birth after 6 months from when Yibbum was done. And she gave birth to a vlad shal a viable child. So the child is a doubt. Because don't know, im ben tisha larishan, is it 9 months from the first husband, from the one that passed away, im ben shiva la'achron, or it's 7 months from the yavam, from the last one. Because at times, a woman who gives birth, there's a 7-month pregnancy, and they give birth like only a partial 7th month, which is really basically 6 months. So although you waited the 3 months, if you did Yibbum right away, and then 6 months later she gives birth, so we don't know, is this from the Yavam, or is it from his brother, the one who passed away? So the figure, therefore, in such a situation, Yitzi beget, he has to divorce her with a get, meaning she's forbidden to him, because maybe it's actually the child from her husband who passed away, and therefore she's not an halacha of Yibbum VChalitzah, but she can't remove without a get, because maybe it's a 7-month child from the Yavam, which it was an appropriate Yibbum, and it's like his wife. So, out of doubt, you have to give a get. Vavod kasher, now the child, either way you look at it, is going to be a viable child, because either he's a child of the first husband, which that was his regular father, or from the second one, which would also be his regular father, because that means to say it was an appropriate Yibbum. Now, but if let's say he cohabits with her, his sister-in-law, after she gave birth to that child, which we don't know was that his and hence appropriate Yibbum, or his brother's and hence forbidden, this woman's forbidden to him, Habam Shivo Achrav Sveik Mamzer. So the children that come after him are doubt if they're illegitimate or not, because they might be the son of the first one, of the husband who passed away. That first one might have been a 9-month baby. Comes out that she's really not applicable for Yibbum VChalitzah. She's his Eishes Ach, Shlei B'Makam Mitzvah, and therefore the subsequent children will be at least a suffix if they're considered mamzerim or not.